The manga starts, and the very first thing that we see is a food company logo, and from the side of it, a man was screaming, "Thank you" on top of his lungs. As the main protagonist, Harumi, bows his head, he thanks someone for all his business, and as he also starts to tear up, everyone around him starts to approach him, telling him not to be so overwhelmed by his success. But as the clients that he managed to persuade thank him, Harumi himself lowers his head even more, and then we learn the reality of everything. Harumi is actually a trained actor, and as his subordinate praises him for his good performance, he thinks that he was a really passionate and hard-working salesman, and he remarks on how he actually cried tears of joy, and it was enough to persuade the client. His subordinate asks if he has ever done theater or maybe acting or something like that, but for a minute, Harumi just listens to this and marinades on these words, and he quickly remembers all his dedicated hard work and all his years he gave to his acting career. But he didn't make it. As he lights a cigarette, he smokes and cries on how dreaming is really not made for everyone. That night, he realizes how he's actually the person on the losing side of life. He cries that in this cruel world, there are people who have to do certain jobs because they have to survive. Then he adds that he is one of them. He's laughing, he's crying, and he's doing everything just to survive, and he adds that this is just like in the acting career and the acting industry where people are always 24/7 lying and putting up fake smiles just to survive. He introduces himself to be a 38-year-old who cannot dream anymore. As he sees a billboard on which an acting teaser was going on, he starts to laugh and call out on how this cannot be called talent. Back in his time, he was actually the most dedicated person to ever approach the stage, but it all failed as his dear friends, who were little less than amateur actors, got ahead of him and they tricked him so bad that he couldn't get up. As he cried to his managers on how they used wicked steps to get a hold of him, his acting career just went downhill after that. As he talks, somebody kept running his mouth on how Harumi actually has a pretty face and could get away with a lot of stuff, and he added pretty big words without knowing the consequences of it. Immediately, Harumi started to act the same way that the broadcasting actors were doing, and as he actually managed to send goosebumps into the subordinate's spine, everyone around him started to notice that he's maybe a drunk old salaryman who's about to pass out on the street. As he curses himself, he calls himself absolutely trash, pathetic, and embarrassing as he sits down. From the side, a woman approaches him, and as he looks to his side, the girl starts to point out how he's not really suited to be an actor rather. He's much more well off being a manager of a talented person like her. As he looks, he sees a girl who removes her cap, and immediately he looks at this girl who was wearing a big coat, and she asks if he would be interested in buying her for 3 million yen. Seeing her absolutely breathtaking figure, he cried to himself that he cannot look away, and as her eyes started to show this dazzling presence that he has never seen, he cried that he's about to be swallowed by this girl's pure radiance. As the scene sweeps, we see that Harumi wakes up, and in front of him was the same girl. As he recoils back, he started to ask why she's here, and she added that last night he was so drunk that she had to put him in the taxi, and she actually dragged him here, and because of that, she was pretty sweaty and had to borrow his bath and even his shirt. Now Harumi started to cry on top of his lungs, asking himself if he had done something terrible, and then the girl actually breaks the ice and adds on how she actually just slept on his bed. Harumi was so scared, and for a minute he had thought that maybe she was going to blackmail him for something, but she brings out his business card and added on how he works in a production company. As they talk for a minute, she asks if there's any reason that he has a picture of an actress on his TV. Immediately, he starts to remember all of his past, and this past actually was a kind of a popular topic. He was madly in love with this girl, who actually turned out to be a world-class actress, but before she got popular both Harumi and her were close. He was pretty much like a shadow of her, but he had this awesome opportunity to act with her in an unknown video. He actually started to notice that he fell in love with her. Everything that this girl did actually put a smile in his heart, and his heart started to get more and more into her, and he actually fell for this woman extremely hard to the point that he reminds himself that he's dominated by one woman and one woman only. But soon after, this girl actually became a world-class star, but following that, she was also getting into this realm of darkness in which she couldn't handle anything anymore, and she had to do something to herself. As he looks at this girl, he starts to remember how she looks strangely familiar to her, and as he remembers the day that he confessed his feelings to her, he remembers that the love of his life actually rejected him and cried on how she cannot love him back, nor can he love her back no matter what. But that's the last thing that he saw, and as he remembered this, he saw this girl in the same shoes and the same presence, and he starts to tear up. He remembered how he was so drawn to her that he left everything, and even though he was not talented as an actor, He did everything that he could, from taking classes to even passing the various expensive tests to just follow her, but he realized that he wasn't able to do it. But seeing this girl in front of him, he realized that she's actually different, more like a naturally God-gifted presence who could easily draw the attention of the audience, and as he was completely drawn out by the pure dazzling figure of her, he immediately knew that this girl right here has enormous talent that almost no one in this world could really grasp at this moment. Now she, on the top of her lungs, started to add that if he even wants to dream about her, then he needs 30 million yen. She starts to list all her rates about how she's going to take 1 million yen for every one episode to 5 million yen for every movie. She started to list on how these are all of her prices that she's going to charge for everything, and added that these rates are going to be constant until she reaches the age of 30. She added that in the next 15 years, he's going to earn 5 million yen, and as she approaches him, she asks if he would be interested in buying her for 30 million and be her manager. As she points her finger out, he immediately started to blush and he shook her off. He stood up and added that he doesn't have 30 million yen, and he's not going to buy her at all. But she added that if he doesn't like 5 billion, then it's his loss. As she leaves, she actually started to clench her fists, and he added that if she's so interested in acting, then maybe she should just ask her parents. But hearing this, her mood turned sour, and she cries that Harumi must be that person who thinks that all parents love their children. Now immediately, the girl puts her hat back on, and she introduces herself, and she cries that this is the end actually, and that was the last time that he saw her. And just like this, it was 1 month, and Harumi, realizing that Aoi actually has an enormous talent, started to look for her, but unfortunately, he couldn't find her anywhere. He cried on how her expression, her face, her youth, her energy, everything matched to a talent who could go extremely popular, and he knew that, and he cried that a talent like that is a miracle. So he actually started to bring together all his fundings to really see if he could persuade her parent. But as he started to look for her more, he realized that 30 million yen is almost impossible for a bum like him. But that's when he realized a text message from someone, and when he checked, he saw that there was this girl who was posting these pictures that were basically more than he could really think about. And as he saw, he started to realize that these pictures were of a woman who strangely looked familiar to the girl that he met. Immediately, he started to realize, and that's when he got a phone call from her, and it was Aoi, and she screamed at him to not look at her, and as she cried, she added that her mother actually found his business card, and that's when she thought that she had found a client, and she started to send pictures to him. Now that's the time when she started to beg her to help her, and then we sadly learn the sad and absolutely painful reality that Aoi has been living. It turned out that her parents were using her to get money from clients, and then her parents would send adult pictures of their daughter in questionable poses and clothes, and it was clear that she was being abused and was being used to get money. Hearing this absolute terrifying and weak voice from Aoi, he knew that she was in trouble that is way beyond his reach, and he started to shake aggressively. And from his side, his annoying colleague started to ask if he's talking to his partner, and he screams to him to shut up. As he said this, he dashes, and that's the time when he began to cash out his entire life savings, his entire cash registry, all his investments, and even his lease contract. He even took out massive loans, and he started to cry on top of his lungs that he has this opportunity right now to save a young girl's career, and if he is late by just 1 day, then he's about to lose a person to the most messed up industry and the most twisted parents ever. He started to cry on how she has so much talent that she can outweigh him 1,000,000 times, so he started to burn all his bridges just to get her to his side, and he cried that he doesn't want her to give up on her own life. As he tracked down the exact location where Aoi was talking to him, he comes across an average apartment and runs towards, and as he approached a room, he noticed that from inside there were sounds coming of someone aggressively beating someone and someone crying, and as he realized that this was Aoi's voice, he started to unlock the door, but he noticed that the door was open. So he immediately opened the door to see that a woman was sitting there, and she screamed on Harumi. When he saw the sight in front of him, he noticed that Aoi was there, and she was all bruised up from top to bottom, and he realized that her parents who were mistreating her actually also abused her so much that every day she would cry, and on top of everything, they were taking pictures of her and selling them online for people to buy and profit from. He immediately slammed a big chunk of money, and he screamed to those pathetic losers that he has all 30 million yen, and he's here to buy Aoi from them, and he's going to give her a job as an actor. As he shoved the money into their disgusting greedy hearts, he screamed on top of his lungs that he would like to take her away from them. As the pathetic mother started to smile on how Aoi actually managed to get a pretty rich client, she smirked. As Harumi looked at that trash, he knew that he needed to move on, so both Harumi and Aoi get up, and as they leave, they go to a different place. As Harumi takes a breather, he cried to her that he's going to take care of everything now. Obviously, Abe was not going to answer anything that he says, so he noticed that it's a pretty bad thing to say to her. But she added on how he actually was rich enough to afford her for 30 million yen, and he on the other hand replied back on how he actually sold everything and even took out massive loans just to be able to afford her. But as she gets up, she thanks him, and immediately she hugs him, and it turns out that Harumi was more thankful than anything. And even though Harumi kind of went out of his way and used his entire life savings, he patted her back and he pushed her away. Now it's time for both of them to progress forward. But as she smiled at him one more time, he gets interrupted, and as he listens to his phone, from the back, Aoi actually herself calls someone, and as she starts to talk to someone, she added that she's just getting started. And it turns out that Aoi is actually the daughter of the actress who Harumi had a massive crush on. And as she added on how her mother was mistreated and was forced to endure everything for herself, she cried that now she's going to get into this industry and dominate and then take revenge on those filthy humans who are disguising themselves with their fake smiles. As she makes an absolutely pissed expression, she cries that now she's going to brutally dismantle the entire industry careers that few pieces of trash had built on innocent lives. Now as we see the real face of Aoi, she's the same daughter of the infamous famous actress who was found dead in her own bathroom, and she had found a perfect person to latch on and use to extend it to the higher tables of acting and then to attack these already established actresses and singers. Although Harumi has been able to persuade Aoi's mother, there's still a major issue left, and that is funding. As Harumi shakes off a pesky salesman who was trying to approach Aoi, they both make their way to Harumi's friend. This friend is someone who's going to support Harumi, but they still don't know if he'll be able to do it. As they walk inside an expo, Harumi spots his friend and introduces him, noting that he and his friend were pretty close with each other and they used to know each other back in high school. He shares that he was a scriptwriter. Now as his friend Yasui sees Harumi, he asks how things have been. But Harumi immediately brings out his business card, and as Yasui sees it, he immediately shoves the card back and screams to him that he's not going to get any money. He spins around and insults him a little, throwing the card back. He adds on how the girl that he has gotten is all looks, and she doesn't really know how to act, and he adds that he's not the same kind of person that he was, and it's not going to lend him any penny for any type of his businesses. After having a few rough compliments and facts, things get all heated up, and as Yasui challenges Harumi to make him cry with the girl's acting, Aoi, on the other hand, smiles and introduces herself, letting him know that she's an actor and she'll definitely make him cry. Now, as they said this, Harumi, who actually got heated and just did this impossible thing, screams on how difficult it is for people to cry from someone's acting alone. But Aoi places her hand on Harumi's head, and she lets him know to please cooperate. So as they start this whole live acting session, it was more like a test for both Harumi and Aoi. This was their first audition to get some money so Harumi can use that money to fund various things to promote Aoi to movies, TV shows, and other things. As Aoi starts to act, she starts to get into this field and this area in which she was extremely comfortable. She starts following a complex script, and as she moved her body in perfect sync, she was careful of doing the most accurate and well-chosen poses and move. Yasui sees that Aoi is acting on his old signature script, and as Harumi kind of begged him to let her do her job, Aoi got into this world where she was unstoppable, and she started to express those hidden and beautiful emotions that were written on the page by a person who was a slave to the world of novels. She cries and does her part of her job so tremendously well that Yasui starts to get flashbacks on how he, when he was younger, was so dedicated to his craft, and as he saw her, he started to realize how empty and how lonely he was when he worked and was so serious about it. As she acted, more and more people started to gather, and as Aoi herself started to tear up, Yasui actually himself teared up seeing this, and as everyone gave her a standing ovation, it was truly a dominant display of acting that was coming from Aoi. Yasui actually decided to take back his words, and as both of them started to talk to each other, Harumi screams that he wants to bring Aoi into the world of acting, and he screams on top of his lungs that her talent is his dream. As both friends strike a deal for the old time's sake. On the other hand, Aoi mails someone and she writes on how it's done. She starts to text someone that she is ready and now she's going to target her mother's best friend. As she deletes the message, Harumi actually manages to afford a brand new office, and as they both start to talk, they share on what they could call it, and they end up deciding on a name from an Arabic language called Al-Abul. She lets him know one more time that she's going to shine the brightest no matter what. Harumi actually kind of sensed this rageful energy coming from her, but she obviously shook it off and then she smiled. One more time, he was again in her charm, and he was ready to start promoting Aoi's talent, and as they both informally introduce themselves one more time, Aoi showcases her gift in their first audition that she did. Aoi's first audition was to secure Harumi a pact with his close friend so he can get some finances. Now once their finances are a little bit smooth, their next plan is to actually audition for an acting job. So that's what both Harumi and Aoi signed up for. They signed for a movie called Confession. It was based on a novel by the same name, and it was a rather complex and really drama-filled revenge story that involved a lot of emotions and important settings. As both of them enter the audition center, they noticed that there were a ton of talented people all around, ranging from really pretty to really creative people, and seeing this, Aoi smiles. She asks on how this is all led by Yukiko, a leading actress who also won several awards, and since her popularity was vast, a lot of people were attracted and interested. Now, as Aoi walks, she sees Yuri, who did a few jobs and managed to get some work here and there, and as she greeted Aoi, Harumi remembered her when she was 5, and she actually was really there for everyone, and she was also one time considered a child priority. As one other girl who was a Japanese Academy member greeted everybody, she was pretty nervous at first, but from the back, a troublesome person called Julia enters, and she added on how everyone was kind of a newbie and they shouldn't bother each other. As Julia approached everyone, she approached Yuri, and she started to mock her like she was a joke to everyone, and she added on how Yuri is so desperate right now that she's been looking for work so passionately. Hearing this, as Yuri was already struggling, she started to shake and she brushed it off with a smile. Aoi, on the other hand, sees this bully who constantly goes to the lesser-known people and just tries to make them really less confident in their things. But Julia is obviously not an unknown person. She's a pretty well-known model for teen magazines. As Aoi walks, she knew what she had to do. As a cute little junior wishes Aoi the best, Aoi actually ends up poking Harumi's cheek, and she lets him know that regardless of what happens, she will always remember what to do. As she leaves, from the back, a manager actually ends up recognizing Harumi. As they both started to talk to each other, she adds on how this movie is being directed by a popular movie director, who's actually a genius who can locate acting prodigies by just looking at them and running them through difficult conditions. Basically, Aoi has this golden chance to really impress or show this director her acting techniques, and she could somehow get a bigger shot at a much bigger scale, which could also jumpstart her career. But obviously, there were a lot of problems since the bigger the bait, the more fish follow it. Inside the audition center, as everyone started to joke, obviously Julia had trouble with almost anyone, and she first approached Aoi, and she started to ask who she is, and as she introduces herself and the agency she's from, Julia started to add on how she hasn't heard any agency like that. But Aoi fires back and asks who she is, and as they both started to talk, Aoi was kind of dominating her in terms of this talk. Julia, being frustrated, ends up throwing a water bottle on her head, and as she gets all drenched, Julia kind of gives her this fake apology, and as she started to ask if she was okay, Aoi, being a smart character, just lets her know that she's okay and she just brushes off and moves on. But Julia, being a troublesome girl, starts to just poke her nose in almost everything that she did, and she added on how she's aiming for roles that are more suitable for higher and bigger agencies, and she added that her manager just looked like an old incompetent man, and she just felt so sorry for her. She added that maybe it's her fetish that she goes out with these old men, and as she started to mock her even more, she held nothing back and added that they must have a really forbidden relationship. Hearing this, from the other side, the director who was pretty serious about his movie actually entered, and from the audition room, screaming sounds were coming, and when he entered, Aoi was grabbing Julia's collar, and as the director walked in on both of them arguing and fighting, Aoi kind of looked like the aggressor in the confrontation. The director that they were going against was this well-known genius who was obviously looking for everyone, and as he shouted with a confident and really mature tone that the audition will begin immediately, Aoi looks at him, and she starts to pat her shoulder, and she starts to recite these words over and over again about how it's been extremely difficult for poor Julia, and as she hugs him, she calls him by a name that is written from a character's book, and as Julia, being an airhead, completely unaware about what she was saying screams on this, but Aoi on the other hand just kept going with her act. And as Julia screams on who Tahara is, from the back, the director added on how this is a character from page 64. As he moves from the side, he added on how Julia is absolutely unprepared and is just here to waste everyone's time. Julia started to scream on how Aoi used her for her performance, and Aoi, being a sneaky, smart fellow, smiled and thanked Julia for her sacrifices. Now, as Aoi started to brush her hairs off, the director just looked at her for a second. As the audition obviously started strong, they were supposed to be 3 characters going in a row, so everyone did their job. Yuri was almost accepted for a character which she was supposed to be a scary character. As she started to do her part of the job, Yuri ended up failing it horribly, and as she leaves, things were starting to get more and more serious. And Julia and Aoi both were in the same category for the same character. Now as they did their job, they started to get into this serious argument, and it seemed like that the director was pushing both of them into these real-life scenarios in which he was determining who would act the best. Aoi started to talk to her in a more professional and more toned and more calculated way, and she did her every move more carefully. The junior who was playing an important role also started to act up, and the three of them started to recreate this scene from the movie that they were supposed to audition for, and as they perfectly do it, Aoi just completely went into this character like she was living it for the past 20 years, and as she did it, Julia just started to feel as if she was drowning in the talent that Aoi was spreading. As things started to heat up, Aoi just did her best, and as the director called everyone off, they sent everyone out. Outside, Julia was screaming, and was banging the doors, and it seemed like Julia was defeated by Aoi by miles, and as the director himself was pretty much interested in her, however in the back of the office and production committee are the big people, big agency holders and big decision makers, and one of them was more interested in Julia than anyone else. As he was muttering to himself on how he has poured so much money behind Julia and how he has sacrificed so much. He ends the talk adding that the director cannot just let Julia go down so an unknown girl can shine. But the director was serious and he added that Aoi is better actor and slammed him by saying that Aoi is the real deal among everyone, and as he went out, he remarked that there's no more talking here and he has already decided who is going to act where and when. Now as he leaves, it seemed like that Aoi has finally secured a good position, but things were more serious as a big agency holder obviously has more power and more influence. So the director got a call from the chief manager of a big agency called Perfect Stage, who threatened the director that Julia would be absolutely perfect for this job. The very next day, the director was under this whole pressure thing, and things were getting more and more serious for him, and he ended up getting a mail in which there was a picture. As he started to play a video of Aoi's mother, he started to watch her perfect acting, and he remembered a scene and how Aoi's mother was an absolute star in whatever she did. Even though her first movie set was kind of small, there were still difficult scenes that her mother actually outshined all the time, and she was so good that even though the movie was kind of weak, she carried the whole thing, and it was so wonderful that Aoi's mother herself was so confident and she even started to tell the director himself that if he's not happy with the character, then she can become that human for his movie. Seeing this, obviously the director didn't know her at first, but when they started to realize her real talent, he remembered how Aoi was similar to her, and that was how Aoi's mother just kept bagging movie after movie and became the star who was on top of everyone, and she dominated it for years and years, and it was so good that he remembered it like it was yesterday. As he sees this picture, he knows they were in this zone where they have to make a decision, either to make Aoi the main character or they had to let Julia into the character. Now, as Aoi herself saw her mother acting in a movie, she cried on how her mother was absolutely beautiful, and from the back, Harumi enters, and he screams on top of his lungs that Aoi was accepted into the audition. Immediately, Aoi jumps at him and she hugs him, and as he added on how they should maintain a distance, Aoi lets him know in a weak voice that she just wants to be here for just a little time. As he realizes that she's still pretty young and she might need it, he agrees. The next day was the grand opening to the shot, and as everyone lined up, all the costumes, all the money that was supposed to be going into this production scene came to the characters, and both Yuri and the junior got their roles of a pretty intermediate level, and Julia, the attitude queen, just got an average C-class acting role, and Aoi, on the other hand, landed the top A-tier acting job. Julia, being that annoying pesky person, started to add on how it's absolutely annoying to see someone else getting higher than her, and she complains on how her father being an agency head can't even bend the rules. As she was absolutely pissed, her boyfriend started to add on how a demon is possessing her eyebrows, and this actually sets her off, and she hated this comment, and she quickly brings out a knife and she stabs it near his head, and she asks on what he had said. Seeing his troubled face, she started to do her thing, and this reveals how arrogant and ego-filled Julia really is, and she can do all the troubled and dangerous things just to get her thing out there. And as she added on how she doesn't give an ounce of care if a third-rate movie is getting well established and getting a new female role, she added that she doesn't give an ounce of care. On the other hand, as both Harumi and Aoi travel to the movie set, Aoi goes into this flashback zone where she vividly remembers how her mother was starting to get into this level of becoming popular, and slowly she started to come home late. It got so bad that even though Aoi's mother wanted to be there for her, she couldn't, and as young Aoi would always act on how her mother can't love her, she did this cute acting pose of her, And as her mother would always hug her, she would cry on how she's always making Abe feel lonely, and even though she has everything, she still doesn't have time for her own child. As things got more and more serious, it seemed like that Abe was forced to play this disguise as a kid since her mother was getting too popular, and she wanted to distance Abe from her to not get that attention, and that's what Abe did. She disguised herself as this new neighbor who was there for summer, and as Abe obviously did her very best and almost passed every test, and everyone started to think that Abe was a boy, but that all changed when Aoi's mother brought in her friend. As her mother's friend was pretty sharp, she quickly found out through the disguise that Abe was trying to imitate being a boy. Both Aoi's mother and her friend were pretty close to each other, and to Aoi, it seemed like that her mother trusted this woman more than anything, but that all changed when Aoi was 10 years old, and when she came back from her school, she found that her mother was lying in the bathtub, and someone brought her out, and she was completely drenched in water, and it seemed like that she did something to her own self, and she couldn't find a way out of her misery. And even though she had this lavish lifestyle, this massive fame, there were still flaws in her mental life that she couldn't see anything forward, and she had to do it. As everyone started to panic, they started to call for an ambulance, but Aoi screamed on how her mother could still be alive, and Aoi's mother's friend actually started to choke Aoi for some sort of reason, and that's what she remembered. After a month of Aoi's mother's passing, her aunt became famous and took Aoi's mother's spot. Seeing this, Aoi was heartbroken to see that her mother was forced to get into this space, and she knew that her mother was forced. She screamed that her mother surely was killed, and she was not a hopeless person. As she cried that there was something wrong and someone forced her to take this decision, there was nothing that poor Aoi could have done back then. As we get back to the day, Aoi starts to remind herself to remember that day always, and as she enters the gathering hall, Julia ends up taking a picture of Aoi, and as she starts to enter, she looks at the same aunt that she had who is now a retired veteran actor who's living her lavish life, and as she looks, she mutters to herself that she's going to make her repent, and as Aoi's aunt sees Aoi herself, she smirks and tells her that it will be a good time for Aoi to face the truth of everything. The next day, the real thing actually began, and as they started to talk more and started to go back and forth, the director was starting to really get his scene correct. For a good scene, a lot of retakes were needed, and so that is exactly what happened. Almost everyone started to go into this loop where the director would push the actors over and over again just to get the perfect shot, and that was also the same with Aoi. Although a scene just captures the final product, behind the screen was a lot of work and a lot of repetition, and even though Aoi did her best, there were still some problems here and there. So the aunt of Aoi actually added that she's going to start interviewing everyone and maybe give them guidance. And as she patted Aoi's shoulder, Aoi hated her existence, and now our main protagonist, Harumi, seeing this, kind of notices this strange behavior of Aoi ever since she started to get real with her audition and also after seeing the world-famous actress. So he gives her a bottle of milk and adds that even though she has messed up with her seniors, it's going to be alright, and he smiles and lets her know that if there is any problem, she can just tell him. As she smiled, telling him that she has nothing, she remarks on how he's so soft, and maybe as a manager, he needs to be a little stricter, and as she leaves. From the side, Aoi's aunt actually looked at her. But as we go to the classroom where Julia was starting to kick the chairs, she was pissed and she cried on how the old director was a loser and made her do the same act for 13 times, and she added on how he's a washed-up director, and she was already in this mindset where she was sure that she was better than anyone, and she just needed one try. Her manager, after getting fed up with her constant yapping, just grabbed her shoulder, and she told her that she needs to get serious because of this, and Julia, being this arrogant, useless talent, fired back that the manager is not supposed to hurt the talent, and obviously she cannot do anything against the contract. But Julia was still already pissed, so she ended up spotting Aoi's clothes and everything, and a wide smirk appeared on her face. From today's acting session, Aoi had to constantly be with her aunt, and after leaving the hall, she was scared and very anxious. As she sits down, from the side her aunt appears and she starts to fire at her, adding that she is cute and all, but such things won't work here. Her aunt added on how she had a friend just like Aoi, and as she talked a little more, from the side, Aoi asked if a two-faced person like her was even friends with anyone. Hearing this, her aunt gets serious and she places a book near her throat, and she with a pissed expression added to her that she must not get carried away. She threatens her and adds that small existences like her can get crushed without any noise. As she said this to Aoi, from the side someone calls out to Aoi and tells her to check her stuff. As she rushes to the girls' toilet, there was a rather big crowd surrounding one of the stalls, and when Aoi looked inside, all of her private belongings and clothes were drenched in toilet water, and seeing this her heart breaks. It was as if she was fighting everyone, and as she barely was able to hold on, her aunt came and started to add harsh comments on how she needs to quit and learn her place. Now since Aoi was barely holding on, and Julia on the other hand was enjoying every second of this, she kept muttering on how she is excited to see Aoi cry her eyes out, and Aoi herself was only one step closer to going into a panic attack. From the side, Harumi enters and asks Aoi if there is anything wrong, and as she clenches the milk that he gave her, she hugs him for a while and gets herself together. After taking a few second pause, she looks back with a confident look, and she shouts to everyone that small things like this won't make her upset or sad. As she shakes this thing off, she moved on one more time, leaving the losers in dirt once more. After this incident, Aoi's aunt started to call out for private guidance for the staff and actors. Many found great inspiration, and many were able to overcome their fear through her word. But when it was Aoi's turn, things started to look sour. Aoi's aunt really made sure to call out to Aoi right after Aoi did an awesome job with her scene, and as they sit for a cup of tea, she started to talk to her about acting, the movie, and the novel. But everything changed when she called Aoi by her real name. Hearing this, Aoi freezes. Her aunt brings out the homework that she did, by paying some people a hefty amount to dig into everything that Aoi did, from living with her second mother to now working together with Harumi. She listed every single detail, and it was like her aunt saw right through her disguise. She added on how it is difficult to follow someone like her, and that was the point when she started to talk about Aoi's mother. Aoi was pretty devastated. She still could feel the extremely cold stare that her aunt had, and from the day first, she was this character who was just belittling her at every possible step, and she hated it. But her worst nightmare came to life when her aunt actually spotted her, and as her aunt started to comment on how she also had a talented friend who was also immediately liked by a lot of actresses and a lot of people. As she saw her and immediately she thought and started to get these flashbacks of her mother absolutely drenched, and the scene where she gave up on her career came to her view. And as her aunt kept talking, Aoi again smiled and added on how her aunt sure acts like a best friend of that person, but she asked if she was even a real friend with anyone. And as she said this, her aunt obviously had the smug face, and Aoi, on the other hand, places her hand on her chest and she called out to her aunt by her real name, Yuki. And as she gets a flashback of Aoi's mother herself calling out to her, she immediately fires back and she grabs her collar, and she starts to threaten her, asking if she thinks that she can be like her mother. She screams at her that even though she's blood-related, she can never ever be like her mother. Now as she starts to scream for her to give up, Aoi, on the other hand, gives this devilish smile as she looks at her, and she immediately freezes, and she recoils back and she checks out her mobile phone. She asks if she's ear-dropping on everything, and as both of them just go into this insane conversation, there were a lot of secrets and a lot of dark things that no one knows, and everyone is getting their own heads in the game. Now she closes Aoi's phone and she gives her something extremely important advice for her acting career, and she lets her know that she's going against great powers and great people, and she should be ready to sacrifice people around her if she's going into this industry. She let her know that she must be ready to lose someone dear to her. As someone interrupts her and Julia entered for her own session, Aoi leaves her aunt, and as Julia started to get into this friendly environment, she shamelessly started to ask what the great actress was giving or talking about with Aoi. Deep down she wanted to get the same piece of advice that she was giving to Aoi. She starts to do it, and her aunt, on the other hand, added on how she had found this security camera footage, and she had seen that Julia had done those bullying pranks, and as she starts to list on all the bad and absolutely terrible habits that she had, from bullying to smoking to even dating any men that she can find, she grabs her head and she tells her that if she keeps doing this lukewarm things, she's going to self-destruct, and tells her to act like an actress. Julia was blown away, and she was about to do something even more cruel. On the other hand, Aoi, thinking about the words that her aunt had said, was fearful. She tells Harumi to drop her near the convenience store, and as he asks if there's anything wrong, Aoi basically was scared of the words that her aunt had said, and she had thought that if she was really getting threatened, then maybe Harumi could get injured or something like that. As she goes out, in the very next second, a black van approaches her. Right there in an instant, the most terrible thing that can happen to a young aspiring actress ends up coming to life, as her phone and her umbrella were the only thing remaining there. As the scene sweeps to an abandoned building, Aoi was tied up, and as she tried to get up, she struggled, and she noticed that her hands were zip-tied, and from the side, the trash Julia smiled at her and waved at her. As Aoi started to notice what she's in for, it seemed like that Julia had kidnapped her and placed her in a more secretive location, and Julia added that now she can scream and cry all that she wants, and no one is going to hear them. As she starts to talk, it seemed like that Julia loved to put people in their places. She was obsessed with showing people their values, and as she mutters to her that she had crushed many people just like her, and cried on how Aoi is the first person she has gone this way, she gets up and she starts beating Aoi aggressively, and she was not stopping so easily. Now it seemed like that the worst possible thing was happening. Aoi was not getting out soon from that place, and she questioned why she's doing it, and she thought that perhaps Julia was going to kidnap her and keep her here for the time being so she can miss her acting jobs. On the other hand, she was not stopping her kicks. As Julia's boyfriend enters, he added on how it's actually a little too much, and he added that they were not supposed to go beyond kidnapping. But as Julia made a disgusted expression, she told him how he's useless as well. She closed the door and she immediately locked him in. From the side, a phone goes on, and as she starts to talk to her boyfriend, she added that right now, Takayuga is completely useless, and as she talks to him, she started to check everything, and she, with a cold tone, tells her own boyfriend that today he needs to do her a favor and ruin Aoi's life completely by assaulting her. As his eyes widened, both Aoi and he just looked at each other, and it seemed like her threats were not to scare her, rather she was doing these things to completely destroy Aoi both physically and mentally. Now her boyfriend started to scream on how she's asking too much, and she, on the other hand, started to belittle him and ask if he can't do it. And from the phone, Julia started to let out these erotic and sweet talk from the back, and as he heard her being all lovely and intimate with someone else, it turned out that there was another man with Julia and she was going all the way with him, and as she introduced him as an actor from Tokyo, and she added on how he's going to be her new friend. As he wraps his arm around Julia, she starts to threaten him and added on how he's basically on a life support that she created. She started to show him his place and then added on how he's just trash, and everything that he has is all because of her and her grace. She added that if he has a good life till now, he has no right to say no to her. Saying this, she started to say some sad things to him, and she ends it all by calling him a washed-up actor. On the other hand, the man starts to do stuff to Julia, and as both Aoi's and Julia's boyfriend's eyes widened, they both looked at each other. Aoi, on the other hand, started to rage bait him and started to add that he has no guts to do this, and this guy is a total wimp. Harumi, on the other hand, has noticed that Aoi has disappeared, and it turns out that she isn't picking up her phone, and things are starting to turn really sour, so he started to look for her everywhere. He first goes out to the agency company and everyone around that he can get in contact with, and knowing that he has gone through every corner of the street, he couldn't find her. Since Aoi's scene was right on the corner, everyone was pushing this pressure on agency, and even the great actress was mocking and telling everyone that they just talked with each other yesterday, and it seemed like that Aoi has made this great grand decision for herself. But as Harumi steps in, he screams that Aoi has actually been missing for a few hours, and he hasn't been able to reach her at all. Now her aunt supposedly fired back, and added on how she ran away from acting because she couldn't handle the bullying and everything else. But as Harumi screams on top of his lungs on how he has put his life on the line to turn her into a star, he screams to everyone that Aoi is not a person who would run away from something like this. As everyone saw his determination, on the other hand, the director said that he's going to wait until sunset, and if Aoi doesn't show up until then, everything is gone for her. As things start to get really bad, on the other hand, Julia's old manager actually remembered Harumi from his acting career, and seeing him get all worked up, she paused for a minute. And as he started to look for Aoi almost anywhere that he could find, he was that desperate. He started to go from people to people, and he begged everyone that Aoi is his last lifeline. He cries that he has burned everything, and she's all that he has, and as he cries and cries, Julia's manager, on the other hand, started to notice that she is involved for sure. Back to Aoi, things start to get really heated. As Aoi started to call him all sorts of names, really forcing him to back down and really enraging him, he starts to really fight back, and also on top of everything, she started to make him remember on how he entered the acting world like a pathetic loser, and now he's getting played by his own girlfriend. As she said this over and over again, she tells him that his life is nothing from the very start. Now as she starts to say even more, she leans at him for a brief moment, and it seemed like she was about to tell him something, and as his eyes widened in the very next second, he pushes her down and he tears her clothes off, and it seemed like that the worst thing was about to happen to Aoi. After some time had passed, both Julia and her new boyfriend were enjoying their lovely time with each other, and as they were distracted by their own stuff, her new boyfriend noticed that there was someone standing outside the room. And as they both got a little spooked, this new boyfriend decided to take care of Harumi. Now, Harumi was banging on the door, and this immediately makes the guy with Aoi start to shiver and hide, as if he has done something very disgusting. From the back, someone hits Harumi's head extremely hard, and he goes down, and as Julia's new boyfriend got all cocky, immediately Harumi got up, and he started to punch the jerk back over and over again. And as they both started to fight with each other, it seemed like that Harumi was easily overpowered, but things were starting to escalate. So Julia, being a lady, started to add that they need to escape no matter what. As they leave, Harumi gets up and breaks the lock and moves inside to find Aoi. Sadly, when he sees her, he immediately was about to give up after finding her in a sad state. It seemed like that she had experienced something terrible, and as Julia's old manager started to tear up, she realized that Julia had reached a point where she started to ruin people's lives forever. As they realized everything, Harumi, on the other hand, shook aggressively, and he started to tell her over and over again that it is fine, and he'll take care of everything, and as both of them started to cry in front of each other, Aoi, on the other hand, asks if she can be an actress despite what happened here, and she tears up from this, and tragically Aoi just breaks down there. On the other hand, both losers, Julia and her new boyfriend, started to joke on how they had done the impossible. Julia started to add on how this going to be the worst case for her father, and as she starts to look out and look at the pictures and everything that her old boyfriend had taken, it seemed like that indeed Aoi was pushed, and she was pushed beyond limits, and it was much, much more worse than that. And as Julia got this thrill from seeing Aoi getting humiliated and destroyed, in the very next second, Aoi ends up giving this extremely threatening and devastating glare at the picture, and seeing this, immediately Julia gets this shiver, and she asks why Aoi is smiling, and she starts to look at the pictures one more time, and she added that there was nothing wrong. But then we actually see what had happened earlier between Aoi and Julia's old boyfriend. Turns out that Aoi starts to explain to him that if he needs to get out of this, then he needs to play his role, and she adds on how the greatest gift of an actor is his or her acting that can fool anyone. She tells him that this is their chance to get the absolute revenge that they're looking for, so as both of them faked everything and took pictures, it seemed like that Julia had walked straight into a trap that she's absolutely going to regret. As she gets a call, her old boyfriend started to laugh on top of his lungs, and he was having such a fun time that he started to call her a pathetic loser, and he added on how he's much better off to do any embracing thing with someone that he loves, and he screams that he's not a dog who listens to her. He tells her that if any video, any conversation, any phone call, and any picture gets leaked out, then she's ruined for her entire life, and he threatens her that she's going to go to jail, and no matter how powerful her father is, he cannot win against hardcore evidence. He tells her that he'll never forgive her for defying him and everything that he had done, and as he started to repeat her stupid phrases, he asks if she remembered his first acting job, and as they started to talk, Julia started to swear at him even more. And the poor guy starts to tear up, and he cries that he's not made for things like this, and cries that destroying lives forever and ever is something that only she can do. And as he cries, she throws her phone, and she immediately starts to take over the steering wheel, and she was just so angry and frustrated that she just wanted to tear Aoi to pieces. But as they both start to fight over each other, in the very next second, their car gets struck by something, and as they were speeding, both of them ended up getting into this terrible accident in which both of them got what they deserved. On the other hand, as Harumi started to blame everything on himself, Aoi lets him know that she's sorry for acting on this on her own, and she's sorry that she planned everything, and as Harumi started to blame himself, he cried that he's never ever going to let this go away, and he added that people are always going to use despicable tactics to get her. Before sunset, Aoi returned back to her acting set, and as she walked, she was obviously extremely hurt from all the brutal beating that Julia had given her, and as she returned, she makes this firm, determined look, and she tells everyone that she has returned, and as she lowered her head, Aoi has once again outsmarted almost everyone who had belittled her and set out traps for her, and as she looks ahead to her aunt, her real fight to claim the top position had just started.